Conflict of interest. This opinion reveals how conflicts of interest compromise healthcare regulation and integrity. This need for justice grows out of the conflict of human interests. John Rawls. The need for justice is a quote by philosopher John Rawls suggesting that when people's interests clash, a demand for fairness arises. Here it sets the tone for the discussion on how conflicting interests in public life require robust measures to ensure fairness. We were sitting in a committee room in the National Assembly building, participating in a meeting of the National Assembly Standing Committee on Health. This sentence establishes the setting, a committee meeting in the National Assembly, and indicates that the discussion is about health policy. The subject under discussion was the regulation of private medical colleges in Pakistan because of serious concerns about their performance. The topic was regulating private medical colleges, prompted by worries over poor performance. Serious concerns implies that the issues were significant. At least 3 members of this committee owned private medical colleges, and 2 others were on the board of different colleges in Pakistan. This reveals a clear conflict of interest, as several committee members had personal financial stakes in the very institutions they were meant to regulate. They were loudly justifying the working of private medical institutions. Nobody pointed out the conflict of interest. The committee members defended the private medical colleges. Loudly justifying means they actively promoted their interests. Yet no one challenged their conflict of interest, suggesting a systemic disregard for ethical accountability. The meeting ended without concluding anything on the stringency of regulation. The discussion did not result in any concrete decision to strengthen oversight or regulation, indicating ineffectiveness. The above example is repeated every day in different forms, with different people, and during different meetings on different topics, and those who have a direct interest in the subject usually prevail. This observation generalizes the problem. Conflicts of interest are common in various meetings, and those with personal stakes tend to dominate the outcomes. Nobody talks about it, nobody takes it up, and if ever there is a mention by anybody, that person becomes persona non grata, a troublemaker, and is portrayed as somebody who doesn't understand the realities of the world. Persona non grata is an idiomatic expression meaning an unwelcome person. This suggests that raising the issue of conflicts of interest is socially and politically punished, discouraging honest discussion. As happened in the above-mentioned meeting, this reinforces that the pattern described was evident in that particular session. Recently, the owner of a medical college, a teaching hospital, and a number of other health-related organizations was made chairman of the Board of Authority of Islamabad Healthcare Regulatory Authority. This sentence provides another example. A person with direct financial ties to the healthcare industry was appointed to a regulatory position. Nothing personal, but it is against common ethical sense. This clarifies that while no personal animosity is intended, the situation violates widely accepted ethical norms. Those who are to be regulated must not head the regulatory body which is going to regulate them. This is a straightforward ethical principle. A regulator should be independent and not have a vested interest in the entities it oversees. In a society suffering a moral crisis, conflict of interest is on the lower rung of the ladder. On the lower rung of the ladder is a metaphor meaning it is a less visible or acknowledged problem, yet still significant in the context of a broader moral crisis. It comprises a faded shade on the ethics spectrum, which people hardly ever see. This metaphor, a faded shade on the ethics spectrum, suggests that conflicts of interest are so normalized that they often go unnoticed. There are much bigger issues such as disrespecting the Constitution and the lack of rule of law. Hence, few care about discussions on conflict of interest. The sentence contrasts conflict of interest with even more severe issues like constitutional disrespect and lawlessness, implying that this problem is trivialized in the face of larger systemic failures. However, in healthcare, ignorance or lack of attention to a conflict of interest can be a matter of life and death, directly or indirectly. This underscores that in critical sectors like healthcare, even minor ethical breaches can have severe consequences, including jeopardizing lives. So, it is indeed very important. A brief, emphatic statement reaffirming the critical nature of addressing conflicts of interest in healthcare. There are many definitions and descriptions of conflict of interest from the legal, moral, and technical perspectives. This acknowledges that conflict of interest is a complex issue with varied interpretations across different fields. One that I really like is picked from a World Health Organization publication. This introduces a specific definition that the writer finds compelling, lending external authority to the discussion. It describes a 2-day meeting on the subject, where experts discussed and agreed on this definition. An actual conflict of interest arises when a vested interest has the potential to unduly influence official or agency judgment, such action through the monetary or material benefits it confers on the official or agency. This definition clarifies that a conflict of interest exists when personal financial or material gains can improperly affect decision-making. Vested interest implies that the individual stands to benefit directly. I think this is it. A brief statement of agreement, asserting that this definition effectively captures the essence of conflict of interest. Those who are to be regulated must not head the body which is going to regulate them. This key ethical principle is reiterated, emphasizing that regulators must remain free of personal interests in the sectors they oversee. In 2021, a major scoping review was published in the British Medical Journal by Susan Shimonis et al. On mapping all known ties between the medical product industry and the healthcare ecosystem. This sentence introduces supporting evidence from an international study indicating that conflicts of interest are well documented in healthcare. They developed a map through the synthesis of 538 articles from 37 countries, showing the extensive network of medical product industry ties to activities and parties in the healthcare system. This highlights the breadth and depth of the issue, with 538 articles from 37 countries underscoring its global relevance. They identified activities in health research, healthcare education, guideline development, formulary selection, and clinical care. This details the areas affected by industry influence, suggesting that conflicts of interest permeate many aspects of healthcare. The medical product industry was found to have direct ties to almost all parties in the healthcare ecosystem, including nonprofit entities, the healthcare profession, the market supply chain, and government. This emphasizes that the industry's influence is widespread, affecting various stakeholders. The most frequently identified parties were individual health professionals, described in 422, 78% of the included studies. This statistic reinforces the pervasiveness of conflicts of interest, particularly among individual professionals. More than half, 303 or 56 PC, of the publications documented the medical product industry ties to research, with clinical care, 156 or 29 PC, health professional education, 145 or 27 PC, guideline development, 33 or 6 PC, and formulary selection, 8 or 1 PC. This detailed breakdown of percentages illustrates the varying degrees of industry influence across different sectors of healthcare. Policies for conflicts of interest existed for some financial and a few non-financial ties. This indicates that while policies do exist, they cover only a portion of the potential conflicts, implying gaps in regulation. Nothing is interest-free, though. A brief statement emphasizing that everyone has personal interests. We all have legitimate professional and personal interests. This acknowledges that having interests is normal and acceptable. The issue arises when opposing interests combine in one person or an entity, and when private interests are pursued through a position of power by undermining professional or public interest. This explains that a conflict of interest becomes problematic when personal gains interfere with official responsibilities, harming the public or professional standards. Situations of conflict of interest are ubiquitous and natural. Ubiquitous means present everywhere. Natural suggests that such situations occur frequently, though they can be managed. The real point of this discussion should be how to deal with conflicts of interest. This shifts the focus from the existence of conflicts to strategies for managing them. First of all, the system should be sensitive to such situations, and it should be able to recognize it. This asserts that awareness is the first step in addressing conflicts of interest. Secondly, there should be an institutional framework to manage a conflict of interest. This calls for a formal system, or policy to handle conflicts, ensuring accountability and transparency. A proper system of declaration and management of conflict of interest blunts the interest to the extent required in the conflict situation. Blunts here means reduces or mitigates. This suggests that an effective system can diminish the adverse impact of conflicting interests. I have sat in many international meetings where all participants had to sign an elaborate conflict of interest form before the beginning of the meeting, and some participants had to recuse themselves on certain points of discussion which had to do with their direct interest. Recuse means to abstain from participating in a decision due to a conflict. This personal anecdote illustrates best practices in managing conflicts. And all this is recorded in the minutes of the meeting. This indicates that transparency and documentation are key components of a good conflict of interest policy. Institutions that believe in and practice good governance usually have explicit, written-down policies on conflict of interest. This emphasizes that high-standard organizations formalize their conflict of interest rules in writing. And the best definition of a policy is that it helps people avoid becoming hostage to events. This metaphor suggests that a good policy prevents individuals from being unduly controlled by unforeseen circumstances or conflicts. Getting caught in a situation and not knowing what to do about it or how to handle it lands the organization in a position of arbitrariness. Arbitrariness means decisions made without consistency or fairness. This warns that unaddressed conflicts lead to unpredictable and unjust outcomes, where power, instead of principle, then prevails. This stark statement means that when conflicts are unmanaged, personal power dominates over ethical principles. Once a policy is made, there should be a mechanism and well-defined responsibilities for the implementation of the policy. This asserts that policies must be supported by clear procedures and accountability measures. The members of the organization should be made aware of the policy. They must be trained and then monitored for their conduct and reported in a transparent way. Appropriate, well-laid-out accountability procedures must take their course. This comprehensive sentence lays out the steps for effective policy implementation: awareness, training, monitoring, transparent reporting, and accountability. True, even with all the above in place, it doesn't mean that everything will be sorted out and everybody will live happily thereafter. This acknowledges that even robust systems cannot guarantee perfect outcomes. The key is to continue to work in the loop of practice, learning, monitoring, course correction, and continuity of practice. Loop of practice refers to an ongoing process of improvement and adaptation. In Pakistan, conflict of interest is generally not seen as a conflict or even a milder form of the problem. Hence, it has permeated our body politic at every level and every sector and organization. Permeated means spread throughout. This criticizes that in Pakistan, conflicts of interest are so normalized that they are overlooked, affecting all areas of public life. When people stop feeling guilty about an unethical act, it becomes normalized, and this is the most dangerous situation. This warns that if unethical behavior is no longer seen as wrong, it becomes accepted, which is highly detrimental to society. The writer is a former health minister and currently a professor of health systems, population health at the Shifa Tamari Millat University. This attribution establishes the writer's credentials and expertise in health systems and policy. Published in Dawn, February 22, 2025.